before the moonwalk, before the sequin glove, before the sold-out stadiums and the title that would follow him forever, Michael Jackson was just a small boy in Gary, Indiana, trying not to miss a dance step, because missing a step had consequences. He practiced us with a belt in his hand, Michael once recalled, and if you missed a step, I would run around the house and hide. He paused before adding quietly, but I would really get it more than anybody. The world knew Michael Jackson as the king of pop. It knew his voice, his moves, his magic. What it did not fully know, or perhaps chose not to examine, was the environment that produced all of it. Behind the perfectly executed performances was a father with a belt. Behind the smile was a child who had learned very early that mistakes were not forgiven. They were punished. In one of the most revealing interviews of his life, Michael described what practice looked like inside the Jackson household. His father, Joseph Jackson, would sit in a chair during rehearsals, belt in hand, watching his sons run through their routines. There was no margin for error. There was no such thing as an off day. We were nervous rehearsing, Michael said. He sat in the chair and he had this belt in his hand. And if you didn't do it the right way, he would tear you up, really get you. When asked how often the beatings occurred, Michael's answer was simple and devastating. Too much. It wasn't only a belt. When asked what else his father used, Michael described whatever happened to be nearby. Objects thrown, a child hurled against a wall as hard as Joseph could manage. His mother, Catherine's voice became a haunting detail in the memory. I just remember hearing my mother scream, "Joe, you're going to kill him. You're going to kill him. Stop it. You're going to kill him." Michael was fast, he said. His father couldn't always catch him, but when he did, oh my God, it was bad. Michael was only 5 years old when he became part of the Jackson 5. By the time the group began its rise, he was already living a life that bore almost no resemblance to a normal childhood. The family had come from a modest 2-bedroom home in Gary, Indiana, and their overnight success transformed everything around them, except in the ways that mattered most to a child, Michael's daily reality. Success did not bring Michael freedom. It brought him more work. While other children played outside, Michael was in a recording studio, doing schoolwork between sessions and then recording for hours. He described looking out the studio window and seeing children running around in a park across the street, laughing, shouting, completely unbothered, and feeling a sadness he couldn't quite name as a boy but understood all too well as a man. I would cry, he said. It made me sad that I would have to go and work instead. That is not the memory of a child star glittering under spotlights. That is a memory of a boy with his face pressed to glass, watching a version of childhood he would never get to have. Michael's public image was built on discipline and precision, qualities that the world admired and rewarded generously. But those same qualities had a shadow side that rarely made it into the celebration. The discipline was not self-generated in the beginning. It was enforced. And the price of imperfection was not just disappointment. It was physical pain. Rehearsals were childhood. Recording sessions were childhood. Being watched, evaluated, and corrected was childhood. The ordinary softness that most children take for granted, lazy afternoons, birthday parties without an agenda, the right to simply be bored, were not part of Michael's early years. Play was something other kids did. Privacy was something other kids had. His brother Jermaine later echoed similar experiences. Multiple members of the Jackson family, over the years, described Joseph's approach to discipline as something that crossed well beyond firmness into a territory that left lasting marks. Joseph, for his part, denied the severity of the accusations throughout his life, defending his methods as necessary for keeping his children focused and away from the dangers of the streets. That defense has always had its supporters. Strictness and mistreatment are genuinely not the same thing, and the line between tough love and harm can be difficult to draw from the outside. But inside the house where Michael grew up, that line appears to have been crossed repeatedly, and the person who suffered most was the one who would later become the world's most famous entertainer. One of the most striking details Michael shared was not about the physical pain itself. It was about what his father's presence alone could do to him. "I was so scared," he said, when describing how he felt around Joseph. Scared. I mean scared. So scared that I would regurgitate. His father's mere presence, just seeing him walk into a room, was enough to produce a physical reaction in Michael. He would vomit. He would sometimes faint, requiring his bodyguards to hold him upright. The body, it turns out, keeps score long after the mind learns to manage its expressions. When asked directly whether he had hated his father during those beatings, Michael did not hesitate. Yeah, strong hate. And then, in the same breath, he explained what that hatred ultimately produced in him as a parent. That's why to this day, I don't lay a finger on my children. I don't want them to ever feel that way about me. It is one of the most quietly powerful things he ever said. Not a lengthy speech, not a rehearsed statement, just a direct line drawn between the wound and the choice, between what was done to him and what he refused to pass on. When Michael built Neverland Ranch, the world largely treated it as a punchline or a source of suspicion. A grown man with a theme park for a home, surrounded by toys and carnival rides and animals, seemed bizarre by any conventional standard, but understanding it as eccentric misses the deeper truth that Michael himself pointed to again and again throughout his life. He was not building a fantasy. He was trying to recover something real. In a 2009 interview archived by CNN, Michael said he did not want to look old. He wanted to stay youthful, to keep playing and running around like a child. Taken in isolation, that sounds strange. Placed against the backdrop of a boy who spent his early years watching other children play while he worked, it sounds like grief. When your childhood is swallowed by labor and discipline, and the constant pressure of performance, youth does not become a fond memory. It becomes an open account, something owed. And some people spend the rest of their lives trying to collect on it, not because they are broken, but because the loss was real and the longing that follows is just as real. Neverland, the toys, the childlike imagery Michael surrounded himself with throughout his adult life. These were not symptoms of eccentricity. They were the ongoing project of a man trying to give himself back what he had been denied. That interpretation is not speculation. It is a pattern of what Michael said repeatedly across decades of interviews when he was willing to speak plainly about his past. The pain of Michael's early years did not stay contained to his memories. It showed up in his relationship with his own body, a subject that became one of the most publicly dissected aspects of his life. In his 1988 autobiography Moonwalk, in his landmark 1993 interview with Oprah Winfrey, Michael acknowledged 2 nose surgeries and a chin implant, attributed his changing skin tone to vitiligo, and pushed back firmly against the broader rumors that had accumulated around his appearance. What is worth noting is not whether every detail of his explanation was accepted, but why a person might develop a complicated relationship with their own face in the first place. A child who is scrutinized, criticized, and humiliated, who is told repeatedly, in explicit and implicit ways, that performance is not enough, that his appearance is subject to judgment, does not simply outgrow that experience. It becomes part of the architecture of how he sees himself. Michael grew up under a microscope, first at home and then in front of the entire world. Those 2 environments reinforced each other in ways that were never going to leave him untouched. In the Oprah interview, he was careful and composed, answering questions about his image without surrendering his dignity to the spectacle of it. Oprah herself later described the interview as unforgettable. What she captured on camera was a man who had spent a lifetime learning to manage himself under pressure without losing himself entirely. That composure, refined over decades, was not coldness. It was survival. What makes Michael's story genuinely moving, beyond the tragedy of what he endured, is what he chose to do with it. He did not repeat the cycle. When he became a father to Prince, Paris, and Blanket, something in him shifted visibly. He became protective in a way that sometimes looked excessive to outsiders, but made complete sense in the context of his own childhood. He became gentle. He became attentive to what it means to be a child who is watched too closely and given too little room to simply exist without pressure. The clearest measure of what mistreatment does to a person is not always what they say about the past. It is often the choices they make about the future, the way they decide to raise the next generation, the values they prioritize, the things they refuse to replicate. Michael understood the harm he had experienced, and that understanding was not passive. It shaped his parenting with deliberate intention. That's why, to this day, I don't lay a finger on my children. He never pretended the pain was small. He never rewrote his childhood into something more palatable for public consumption. He loved his family. He forgave his father, something he spoke about in his 2003 documentary, Living with Michael Jackson, acknowledging both the mistreatment and the complicated process of making peace with it. Forgiving Joseph did not mean pretending Joseph had not caused damage. It meant carrying the damage without letting it define his relationship with everyone else who came after. The Jackson family is one of the most extraordinary stories in American music history. That part is undeniable. But success stories,